Why was the valley so quiet? Lieutenant Edward Hayes had learned to distrust silence. It was the kind that made your heartbeat sound louder than gunfire, the kind that came before something violent, the kind that meant the enemy was listening too. The sun burned over Afghanistan's Korangal Valley, a place the maps called a region of strategic importance, but the soldiers called something else entirely, the Valley of Death. Rocky slopes, hidden ridgelines, ghost villages where nothing moved but the wind and the occasional echo of regret. Hayes lay prone on a ridge, peering through his rifle's scope at a cluster of mud brick houses below. His team, SEAL Team 7, had been in position for nearly 6 days. 6 days of rationed water, whispered words, and waiting for movement that never came until now. A flicker, a figure moving between walls, then another, and another. 2 o'clock, whispered Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, eyes narrowing under the brim of his dusty cap. Hayes adjusted his scope. His hands were steady, but his gut was not. The intel said this outpost was a meeting point. Several high-value Taliban commanders were expected to gather here, but something didn't line up. Too much quiet, too much calm. Count, Hayes asked softly. Was 12 now 15? He exhaled slowly. 15 armed targets, 6 of us. That math had never favored survival. Command, this is Sidewinder, Hayes murmured into his mic, voice low, steady. Target confirmed. Request permission to proceed. The reply came fast, almost too fast. Sidewinder, this is Command. You are clear to engage. Extract package and proceed to extraction point Alpha. He nodded once. That was the job. Follow orders. Move silent, get in, get out. Copy, engaging. He motioned to his men, silent gestures honed through years of training. They moved like a machine, precise, rehearsed, invisible. But when Rodriguez's hand shot up in a sudden warning, everyone froze. Sir, he hissed, we've got company. From their elevated position, Hayes could now see it too, a faint dust plume rising in the distance. One vehicle, then another, then 5. North and east, both directions. This wasn't in the briefing, Wilson muttered, adjusting his comm gear. Hayes's stomach tightened. Command, confirm, do we have friendlies approaching from North Grid 7? Static then. Sidewinder, be advised, satellite shows multiple hostiles converging on your position. Possible compromise. Abort mission. Repeat, abort. Hayes clenched his jaw. Too late. The first shots cracked across the valley, sharp, echoing, metallic. Bullets chewed through the rocks inches from his head. Contact east and north. They walked right into it. An ambush. Fall back, defensive positions. The SEALs scrambled for cover, diving behind boulders as the air filled with dust and chaos. The valley exploded with sound, the scream of gunfire, the sharp hiss of ricochets, the deafening roar of an RPG slamming into stone. Within minutes, the battlefield was a nightmare. Petty Officer Collins took a round to the shoulder, his weapon clattering from his hand. Wilson went down next, shrapnel embedded deep in his thigh. Even Rodriguez, unflappable and calm, had blood trickling down his cheek. Command, this is Sidewinder, Hayes shouted into the radio over the noise. We're taking heavy fire, 3 wounded. Request immediate air support. There was a pause, the kind that steals hope. Sidewinder, nearest air support is 20 minutes out. Hold position. 20 minutes. They wouldn't last 5. Hayes took a deep breath, tried to think past the ringing in his ears. They were pinned down, outgunned, outnumbered 5 to 1. The terrain, once their advantage, was now a cage. Rodriguez. Sir. Ammo count. 3 mags each, maybe less. Wilson's down to 2. Not enough. Not even close. The enemy was moving fast now, advancing with brutal efficiency. Hayes could see them through the smoke, shadows, and the heat shimmer. shouting in Pashto, coordinating, tightening the noose. Rodriguez pointed toward the ridge. "Sir, heavy weapons, East Ridge. They're setting up a DSHK. A heavy machine gun. 50 caliber rounds that could cut through their cover like paper." Hayes grabbed his radio. "Command, situation critical, we need." Then a sound. Not from his radio, from the valley itself. A single crisp gunshot. Then another. Each one clean, controlled, distant. Hayes looked up in confusion just as the Taliban fighter setting up the machine gun collapsed. A heartbeat later, his partner fell too. "What the hell?" Rodriguez whispered. Another shot, another hostile down. Then a pause. Then two more, both perfect headshots. Someone was out there. Someone good. "Sidewinder, this is Phantom," a voice came through the radio. Female, calm. "Hold position, support inbound." Hayes froze. He didn't recognize the call sign, didn't recognize the voice. "Phantom," Rodriguez repeated. "That's not in the op brief." Hayes said nothing. He just listened to the rifle cracks echoing across the valley, the rhythm of precision, the sound of death moving with purpose. Whoever she wasn't guessing. Every bullet counted. "Phantom, this is Sidewinder," Rodriguez tried. "Appreciate the assist. What's your position?" "Static then. Maintain current position. Creating extraction corridor southeast ravine. ETA 15 minutes. A woman's voice. Smooth, composed, deliberate. But under the calm, something else. The edge of defiance. 15 minutes, Hayes muttered. "We won't last that long." The Taliban fighters were regrouping, using smoke grenades now to break the sniper's line of sight. Clever, experienced. The balance was shifting again. Rodriguez checked his ammo. 3 magazines left, sir. After that, knives and prayers. An RPG exploded near their position, the shockwave slamming them into the ground. Collins screamed. "Blood, more blood." "Men down," Wilson called out, crawling toward him, his own leg bleeding badly. Hayes's mind raced. He could hear the distant sniper, her shots slowing, adjusting, compensating for the smoke. Whoever she was fighting hard. Alone. "We can't stay here," Hayes decided. "We move southeast now." Rodriguez frowned. "That's open ground, sir. We'll be cut to pieces." "We're cut to pieces if we stay." But before he could move, the radio crackled again. "Sidewinder, negative on movement. Enemy has placed IEDs along ravine approach. Hold position." Hayes slammed a fist into the dirt. "We're trapped." Another explosion shook the ridge. A rain of rock and shrapnel fell over them. Rodriguez ducked, shouting over the noise. "Sir, they're closing in." Then through the haze, movement. A figure. Fast, precise. Running low between rocks, rifle tucked tight, cloak of dust trailing behind. "She's on the move," Wilson breathed, disbelief in his voice. The mysterious sniper. The woman had abandoned her overwatch and was charging straight toward them. Hayes blinked, stunned. "No one does that, not alone." "Cover fire," he barked, and the seals opened up, suppressing the enemy's flank. Through the smoke she moved like a ghost, shifting, firing, vanishing. Every motion deliberate, rehearsed. She wasn't just trained. She was engineered for this. 3 Taliban fighters appeared ahead of her. She took the first with 2 quick rounds. The second a knife, a perfect throw. The third hand-to-hand, brutal and efficient, a blur of motion and grit. By the time she reached them, Hayes could see her face beneath streaks of camouflage and sweat. Recognition hit like a punch. "Lieutenant Winters." She nodded once, reloading. Her rifle wasn't standard issue. It was sleek, modified, humming faintly as it recalibrated between bursts. An auto sniper system, something experimental. "Your exfil plan," she said, barely glancing at him, "just got complicated." Hayes stared. "Who authorized your presence here?" "Colonel Collins. Observation only, she replied, checking Collins's wound with quick, practiced hands. Then you got ambushed, so plans changed. Another explosion thundered behind them, closer this time. Dust cascaded from the rocks. They've got mortars, Winters said, her tone grim. We've got 10 minutes before this ridge is gone. She pulled a compact tablet from her vest. A topographical map flickered to life. There's a secondary extraction point here, but we'll need to cross 200 meters of exposed ground. Rodriguez shook his head. With 2 wounded, that's suicide. Winters's eyes flicked up sharp, unyielding. Not suicide, just difficult. She reached into her pack, producing 3 modified smoke grenades, dull gray cylinders marked with experimental tags. Thermoptic smoke, she said, blocks both visual and infrared. I only have 3. Hayes studied her, the focus, the calm under fire. There was something about her presence, a stillness that didn't come from arrogance but from purpose. What's your plan? I'll create a diversion on the west flank, she said, locking a fresh magazine into her weapon. Draw their fire. You move the wounded. We rendezvous at extraction point Bravo. That's suicide, Hayes repeated. She gave a faint, humorless smile. Not with this rifle. Trust me, Lieutenant, I didn't come all this way to die in this valley. A bullet snapped past her head, sparking against the rock. She didn't even flinch. Decision time, she said. We move now or we don't move at all. Hayes hesitated for half a second. Then he nodded. Do it. She pulled the pin on the first smoke grenade and hurled it west. Within seconds, the valley was drowned in shifting gray clouds. The world turned to mist and chaos. The last thing Hayes saw before they split was her silhouette, rifle raised, vanishing into the smoke, a single ghost holding back an army. What kind of person runs toward the fire when everyone else runs away? The smoke twisted in violent patterns, thick enough to choke on. It rolled down the slopes like a living thing, swallowing light, sound, and sanity. Inside it, somewhere west of the ridge, Lieutenant Kara Winters moved through a storm of her own making. Her breathing was measured, mechanical, not from calm but from discipline. Every motion had purpose. Every heartbeat was a decision. Through the thick haze, shadows flickered, enemy fighters firing blindly, shouting in confusion. She used their panic like cover, advancing low and fast. Her rifle, the XM-19 auto sniper system, still in prototype testing, purred softly in her hands, adjusting to wind, heat, and distance. Each pull of the trigger wasn't just a shot. It was an equation solved in real time. She aimed, fired, moved. 3 down, 2 more flanked her left. She rolled behind a shattered boulder, reloaded, and let her pulse settle before firing again. 1 breath, 1 life. To her, combat wasn't chaos. It was rhythm, the kind that never really leaves you even when the war over. But this time, something was different. This wasn't her mission. This wasn't her fight. And still she was here. Why am I doing this again? She thought as another explosion rocked the valley, because someone has to. Far behind her, Hayes's team was fighting to stay alive, dragging the wounded across uneven ground, slipping between stone outcrops, every footstep echoing their desperation. Keep moving, Hayes shouted, voice breaking through the chaos. We're halfway there. Collins groaned, half-conscious, blood soaking through his bandages. Wilson limped beside him, pale and trembling but refusing to stop. Rodriguez moved like a shadow, scanning, covering, guiding. Every few seconds, they'd hear it, the sharp, rhythmic crack of Winter's rifle echoing through the smoke. She was still fighting, still buying them time. Who the hell is she? Wilson muttered between gasps. Hayes didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. He just knew one thing. Whoever that woman was, she was the reason they were still breathing. West Ridge. Winters took cover behind a burnt-out technical truck, her ears ringing. The barrel of her rifle glowed faintly from overuse. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her knee throbbed where shrapnel had kissed it. But pain meant she was alive. And alive meant she could still fight. The smoke began to thin, revealing shifting silhouettes. She could see them now, dozens of Taliban fighters spreading out, trying to flank her position. They were disciplined, fast, too many. She ejected a spent magazine, slid in a new one, and glanced at the small digital counter on her rifle's display. 21 rounds left. Make them count. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Another enemy fell, and another. But for every one she dropped, 2 more took their place. A voice broke through her comms haze. Phantom, this is Sidewinder. We've reached the ravine. 2 critical, need your position. Over. She exhaled. Negative, Sidewinder, hold extraction. I'm still West Ridge. Engaged. Maintain cover until clear. Static, then. Winters, that's an order to fall back. She smiled faintly. Not my first order I've ignored. Her last words before cutting transmission were calm, almost tender. Keep them safe, Lieutenant. In the ravine, Hayes crouched behind a rock formation, breathing hard. The helicopter wasn't there yet. Rodriguez scanned the horizon. Sir, I've lost visual on her. Hayes didn't respond. He was listening, straining to catch even a single shot from her position. But the rifle's rhythm had gone quiet. The silence was worse than the gunfire. Silence meant uncertainty. Do you think she, Wilson began, but Hayes cut him off. She's fine, focus on the wounded. But inside he wasn't sure. Winters crawled along a slope, dragging her rifle behind her. Her vision blurred from dust and dehydration. The thermoptic smoke had mostly dissipated, and with it, her cover. Her body screamed for rest, but she kept moving. She reached for the comm again. Command, this is Phantom. Be advised, SEAL Team 7 has reached secondary extraction point. Hostiles remain active west sector. I'm initiating. A burst of gunfire interrupted her, rounds slamming into the dirt beside her. She rolled behind cover, heart pounding. They've got me zeroed. A grenade detonated nearby, sending her tumbling down the slope. She landed hard, pain radiating through her ribs. Her rifle clattered away. For a moment, everything was still. Just the sound of wind. And the dull throb of her own heartbeat. Get up. She pushed to her knees, blood dripping from a cut above her eyebrow. Her vision swam, but her instincts, honed by 1,000 repetitions, guided her hands. She reached for her sidearm, scanning the ridgeline. 3 hostiles closing fast. Too close for a rifle anyway. She waited, listened to their footsteps. 1, 2. She rose in a blur of motion, double-tapped the first 2, then pivoted and kicked the third backward into the dust. He fired wildly as he fell, a bullet grazing her arm. Winters dropped him with a final, precise shot. Her breathing came heavy now, not from fear, from fatigue. This wasn't supposed to be her fight. She was supposed to observe, to gather data on the rifle's AI-assisted optics, to watch. But she'd watched enough in her life. Watched too many good soldiers die, because command waited for the perfect timing. That's why she came. That's why she stayed. Because sometimes, the difference between orders and morality was the moment you decide which voice to listen to, the one in your ear, or the one in your heart. Command, this is Sidewinder, Hayes called over the comms. We've reached extraction point Bravo. 2 critical, repeat 2 critical. Request immediate dust-off. Copy that, Sidewinder, came the response. Blackhawk inbound, ETA 7 minutes. Rodriguez was kneeling beside Collins, trying to keep him conscious. Stay with us, man, come on. Wilson's face was pale, his breathing shallow. Sir, she's not coming back, is she? Hayes didn't answer. Then distant, faint but clear, a single rifle shot. Then another. Then silence. Hayes stood slowly, staring west. He could almost feel it, the fight, the chaos, the desperation. And somewhere out there, a woman who'd already given everything once, giving more. He whispered under his breath, "Don't you dare die out there." West Ridge. Winters leaned against the burned-out remains of a truck, reloading with trembling hands. Blood trickled down her side, staining her uniform. Her rifle's display flickered, sensors damaged, barrel overheating. System integrity compromised. The weapon's AI whispered through her earpiece. "Tell me something I don't know," she muttered, ejecting the magazine. Her vision tunneled, her hands shook, but her eyes stayed sharp. Through the scope she could see them, a dozen hostiles regrouping, preparing for a final push toward the ravine. She adjusted the rifle manually now. The targeting system was dead. This would be all her. She fired once, twice. Missed the third, adjusted. Hit the fourth dead center. Each shot tore through the silence like a heartbeat. Each one bought another second of survival for the men she'd never met. Then something unexpected, a sound cutting through the noise. Helicopter rotors. Extraction. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that only pain allows. Took you long enough. But it wasn't over, not yet. The Taliban were moving fast, sprinting through the dust toward the extraction point. She couldn't let them reach it. She grabbed the last of her C4 charges, small, shaped, perfect. Time to even the odds. She planted the explosives along the ridge, her movements automatic despite the dizziness. The detonator was slick in her bloody hands as she armed it. "Phantom to Sidewinder," she whispered. "You've got movement toward your 6. Get ready. When I say move, move." "Winters," Hayes's voice burst through the static. "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter, just be ready." A shadow moved above her, enemy soldier, too close. She spun, fired once, and dropped him. Then she looked down the slope, toward the ravine where the SEALs were waiting. The helicopter was circling lower now, its rotors kicking up dust and hope. She took one final breath, thumb hovering over the detonator. "For the ones who make it home," she whispered. The explosions ripped through the ridge in a chain of thunder, fire erupting in a brilliant line of light. The ground trembled, rocks collapsed, enemy fighters vanished into smoke and chaos. Hayes ducked instinctively as shockwaves reached them. The blast threw dust and debris over the ravine. When the noise faded, only silence remained. No gunfire, no movement. Rodriguez blinked through the haze. What the hell just happened? Hayes's heart pounded. He grabbed the radio. "Phantom status, do you read?" No response. "Winters, do you copy?" Still nothing. He stood there staring toward the West Ridge, a mountain of smoke and ruin now. The helicopter was coming in fast, blades slicing through the fatting chaos. He didn't know if she was alive. He didn't know if she'd ever answer again. But somewhere in the silence, as the rotor wash whipped around him, Hayes felt it, not relief, not victory, but the quiet weight of gratitude. Because sometimes, the people who save you never stay to be thanked. Why do the ones who save us always vanish before we can say thank you? The thump of rotor blades shook the air, scattering smoke and dust into spiraling ghosts above the ravine. The Blackhawk came in low, its engines screaming against the thin mountain wind. The pilots didn't waste time with perfection. There was no such thing out here, just survival. "Let's move," Hayes shouted, his voice raw, half drowned out by the helicopter's roar. Rodriguez and Wilson struggled under the weight of Collins, whose blood had turned his uniform a deep, ugly red. They staggered toward the landing zone while Hayes scanned the ridge through his scope one last time. Nothing. No movement. Just the crackling of fire devouring rock and sand. "Come on, sir," Rodriguez yelled, his voice barely audible. Hayes hesitated just long enough for his gut to twist into a knot. She's still out there. He could feel it. Winters hadn't just saved them. She'd made the impossible possible. And now she was somewhere beyond that smoke, maybe alive, maybe gone. The thought clawed at him as he turned and helped lift Collins onto the bird. "Command, this is Sidewinder," he shouted into his radio. "Extraction initiated. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Be advised, unknown friendly phantom still unaccounted for. Request search and recovery team." The response came back through static and distance. "Negative, Sidewinder. Area still hot. We'll authorize search once air cover stabilizes. Get your men out." Hayes's jaw tightened. "Copy." But his eyes didn't move from that ridge. The Blackhawk's crew chief leaned out, gesturing frantically. "We gotta go, sir, now." Rodriguez looked at him, saw that same war in his eyes. "Don't even think about it, Lieutenant. She's one of us now, but if you go back, you'll just add another name to the wall." Hayes didn't answer. He just watched the horizon burn. Sometimes leaving someone behind isn't failure, it's survival. But the words meant nothing when the guilt was louder. The Blackhawk lifted off, its weight rising from the ground like a held breath finally released. As they climbed, Hayes looked out the open door, the valley shrinking below, the smoke curling into the fatting sky. He tried to count how many fires she must have started, how many men she must have faced alone. But the math didn't matter anymore. She had held the line long enough for them to escape, and that was all Command would remember. He'd remember more. 3 days later. Bagram Airfield. The hum of medical machines replaced the sound of gunfire, the smell of antiseptic instead of smoke. Yet somehow, Hayes couldn't sleep. He sat beside Collins's bed in the dim hospital ward, the steady beeping of heart monitors marking time like a clock with no mercy. Wilson lay 2 beds over, leg bandaged, IV dripping quietly, both alive, barely. Rodriguez stood by the window, arms crossed. "Command says the ridge is still too unstable for recovery ops," he muttered. "Landslides, secondary explosions, the whole area's compromised." Hayes nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. "And Phantom?" Rodriguez hesitated. "No signal, no body either, just gone." Gone. That word had a way of sinking deep, heavy as a stone. He rubbed a hand across his face. "She was real, right? I didn't hallucinate her." Rodriguez snorted softly. "If you did, she was one hell of a detailed hallucination. I checked the logs. There's no record of a phantom unit in that AO. But get this," he glanced around, lowered his voice. "Intel says an experimental sniper team was operating under Project Aegis. Female officer, lieutenant rank, attached to Special Operations Command. The name's classified, but the call sign Ghost." Hayes frowned. "Ghost." Rodriguez nodded. "Fits, doesn't it? She comes out of nowhere, wipes out half the valley, then disappears." Hayes leaned back, staring at the sterile ceiling. "If she's dead, she deserves a name, not a myth." Rodriguez's tone softened. "Maybe she'd prefer it that way." Outside, night had fallen, the kind of night that swallowed sound. Hayes found himself walking alone along the flight line, past silent aircraft glinting under floodlights. The mountains loomed in the distance, black shapes against a darker sky. He thought of her voice, calm, precise, human. "Keep them safe, Lieutenant." She hadn't said goodbye. She said keep them safe. That meant she never planned to make it back. Hayes clenched his fists. "Damn it, Winters," he whispered to no one. "You should have waited." A voice came from behind him, startlingly close. Winters rarely waited for anyone. He turned. Colonel Eileen Collins stood there, posture straight, expression unreadable, the kind of composure that came from decades in uniform. "Ma'am," Hayes said, straightening instinctively. "At ease, Lieutenant," she said. "I read your after-action report." "Then you know we wouldn't be alive without her." Collins nodded once. "I know." "Then why is she still listed as unaccounted for? Why hasn't a search been?" Because what happened in that valley, Collins interrupted, her tone sharp but not unkind, doesn't exist. You and your team were never there. She was never there. Understand? Hayes stared at her, disbelief cutting through exhaustion. With respect, ma'am, that's unacceptable. Her eyes softened just barely. You think I don't agree? You think I didn't fight to get her back? The words stopped him cold. Collins sighed. Kara Winters was one of mine. I trained her, I deployed her, and I buried her once already. Hayes blinked. What? She was presumed KIA 2 years ago. Kabul operation, classified losses, but she reappeared, volunteered for a covert test program, Aegis. She wasn't supposed to be in direct combat ever again, but you know her. Orders are only suggestions. Hayes's throat tightened, so she went rogue. Collins's gaze drifted toward the horizon. Not rogue, just human. There was silence between them, the kind that holds too much truth to break. Finally, Collins said, "You should rest, Lieutenant. Your men need you, and she'd hate to know you were wasting energy on guilt." As she turned to leave, Hayes spoke softly. "Was she always like that?" Collins paused. "Like what?" He exhaled. "The kind of person who walks into hell without flinching." The colonel smiled faintly, eyes glimmering with memory. "She didn't walk into hell, Lieutenant. She carried it with her. The rest of us just tried to keep up." Morning. The ward smelled of coffee and sterilized linen. Hayes sat by Wilson's bed, the younger SEAL finally awake, pale but grinning weakly. "Sir," Wilson rasped, "they say we're getting medals for this." Hayes shook his head. "There won't be medals, not for this mission." Wilson's smile faded. "Then what do we tell people about her?" Hayes looked out the window. The sunlight was blinding off the tarmac. "We tell them the truth," he said quietly, "that when everything went to hell, someone showed up, someone who didn't ask permission to do the right thing." Rodriguez entered then, a file in his hand. "Intel update, sir. You'll want to see this." Hayes took it, unmarked, thin, the kind of folder that shouldn't exist. Inside were 2 photographs. The first was a grainy satellite image of the valley. The second, a blurred shot from a drone camera, timestamped 12 hours after extraction. A lone figure moving across the rubble, limping, carrying something heavy slung across her back. The rifle. Hayes's heart kicked once hard. "That's her." Rodriguez nodded. "Command says the area was hit again by insurgents right after. No body found. But whoever that is, they walked out of the valley." Hayes stared at the photo, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told you she was alive." Later that night, in the dim quiet of the recovery ward, Hayes sat by the window again, the file open on his lap. He turned the photo over, tracing the faint outline of the figure. "She's out there," he murmured, "still fighting her own war." Collins's words echoed in his head. She carried hell with her. He wondered if that was what strength really was, not being fearless, but fighting even when fear is the only thing keeping you company. Somewhere far from the base, in the dust and silence of the Afghan mountains, a lone campfire flickered near the remnants of a destroyed vehicle. A figure sat beside it, cleaning a rifle piece by piece. The weapon hummed faintly, damaged but alive, like its owner. Lieutenant Kara Ghost. Winters watched the horizon, her face half hidden beneath a scarf. The wind tugged at her hair, the fire reflecting in her eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the scope, not from weakness, from exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones when the mission never really ends. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small, blood-stained patch, the insignia of SEAL Team 7. She'd found it after the explosion. She kept it. "Still alive, huh?" she whispered into the wind. "Good." Her gaze drifted toward the dark sky, a sky she'd almost disappeared beneath. Then quietly, "You made it out, that's enough." She tightened her grip on the rifle and stood, silhouetted against the fire. The war hadn't ended, not for her, it never really did. But somewhere, across the radio silence and miles of stone and dust, she hoped the men she saved were sleeping peacefully, because peace was something she no longer knew how to keep. How long can one soul keep fighting when the war no longer ends? The mountains slept beneath a veil of dust and dusk. A single figure limped through the silence, her shadow long and unsteady in the fading light. Lieutenant Kara Ghost. Winters hadn't spoken in hours. There was no one to hear her if she did. Her throat burned with thirst. Her side screamed where the bullet had torn through flesh days ago. Every step left a trace of blood on stone, but she kept moving. Always forward. Always toward the faint promise of survival that shimmered like a mirage. The wreckage of the ridge lay far behind her now, buried under rock, fire, and memory. She didn't look back. You never do when you've already lost too much. She'd found shelter in a ruined shepherd's hut 2 nights before, a single wall, half a roof, and just enough cover to let her stitch her wound under the flicker of a dying flashlight. Her hands trembled as she pushed the needle through torn skin, biting down on a strip of cloth to stop from screaming. When she was done, she had laughed, a dry, hollow sound that frightened her. "Congratulations, Ghost," she'd whispered to the empty dark. "You're your own medic, too." The rifle, her XM-19 auto sniper system, lay across her lap, cracked, scorched, but still functional. The weapon's AI core flickered, struggling to reboot. "System damage critical," it stuttered through her earpiece. "So am I," she murmured. "We'll make do." By the third day, the bleeding had slowed. The pain had not. She scavenged from what she found: half-burnt rations from a destroyed convoy, rainwater collected in a rusted canteen. It wasn't enough. It never was. Each night she built a small fire she never looked directly at. Flames were dangerous. They reminded her of the ridge, of the screams that had faded too quickly, of the silence that had followed. But silence wasn't peace. It was memory. Sometimes she'd catch herself whispering names, people she'd served with, faces she hadn't seen in years, some dead, some gone. One of them, Colonel Collins, had told her once, "You can't save them all, Kara. You're a soldier, not a savior." But she'd tried anyway, and that's what haunted her most, the moments she succeeded and the faces she couldn't forget. She pressed her hand against her wound, feeling the pulse beneath her fingers. "Still here," she said to herself, voice barely a whisper. "Still here." Then she heard it, the sound that makes soldiers forget to breathe. Engines. Faint at first, then louder. Multiple vehicles grinding over rock. Winters doused the fire instantly, dropping to her stomach and crawling to the ridge edge. Her vision blurred from exhaustion, but she could make out the convoy, 6 trucks, maybe more. Fighters, Taliban colors, searching. They're looking for something. She reached for her rifle, peered through the cracked scope. Her targeting systems were dead, but her instincts weren't. Through the magnified haze, she saw something strange. One of the trucks bore a different flag. Not Taliban, not local militia. Black, unmarked. Her heartbeat slowed. "That's not local command," she muttered. The convoy halted near the valley where she'd set the charges days before. Men got out, not just fighters, but someone else. Someone in American fatigues. Her stomach twisted. No, that can't be right. She zoomed in, adjusting the focus manually. The man stood near the truck, talking with the insurgent commander. She couldn't hear, but the body language was unmistakable: discussion, not threat. Cooperation. "American," she whispered. "No unit insignia." A part of her wanted to believe she was seeing wrong, that the concussion, the fever, the pain were twisting her senses. But deep down, she knew better. This wasn't just an ambush. It was orchestration. She felt a rush of nausea, anger burning under her fatigue. Someone had sold them out. Someone high enough to arrange intel, routes, and response delays. "Command, what did you do?" she whispered into the dead calm line. The radio hissed softly, empty. Night came fast in the mountains. The convoy's headlights cut across the valley like blades. Winters waited until the engines faded into the distance, then gathered her gear and started moving again. Her pace was slower now, every step a whisper of pain, but something inside her had shifted, something sharp, clean, focused. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was hunting. The betrayal carved its own clarity. It wasn't about medals or commendations, those were illusions. It was about truth, and truth was something soldiers rarely got to keep. She pressed on until her legs gave out near dawn. At Bagram, miles away, Lieutenant Hayes couldn't shake the unease. He stood outside the command tent, the early sun turning the airfield gold. His men were recovering, the official reports were signed, and command had closed the mission file. But closure wasn't peace. "Lieutenant Hayes," Colonel Collins said as she stepped out of the operations building. Her uniform was crisp, her eyes unreadable. "You're cleared for R&R. I suggest you take it." "With respect, ma'am," Hayes said quietly. "I need to know what really happened in that valley." She studied him, the silence stretching between them. "Sometimes," she said finally, "the truth is just another weapon. You don't want to be the one holding it." Hayes frowned. "So it's true, then. Someone inside command leaked our mission data." Her expression didn't change, but something in her jaw tightened. "Go home, Lieutenant." He took a step closer. "If she's still alive." Collins cut him off sharply. "If she's alive, she doesn't need your help." She turned to leave, but Hayes caught the faintest tremor in her voice when she said, "And if she's not, she died saving men who deserve to be saved. That's all that matters." But it wasn't all that mattered, not to him. Back in the mountains, Winters woke to the sound of gunfire, distant, scattered. She stayed still, listening. It wasn't directed at her. It was far off, near the valley's southern edge. She crawled to a vantage point, scanning the terrain through the broken scope. There, smoke, and near it, movement. A small group of villagers, no weapons, being rounded up by militants. Her jaw clenched. She didn't owe anyone anything anymore. Not command, not the war, not even herself. But leaving civilians to die wasn't in her nature. It never had been. She checked her ammunition, 2 magazines. That was it. Her weapon's power core flickered weakly. "Guess we're doing this the old way," she muttered. She took position on the ridge, exhaled, and waited for the wind to shift. Then she fired. The first man dropped instantly. Panic spread through the group of fighters. The second fell before the others realized where the shot came from. They scattered, firing blindly. Winters moved along the ridge, her form melting into the rocks. Every shot she fired was deliberate, not vengeance, not duty, just precision, just justice. When the smoke cleared, the villagers were gone, fled into the hills. She slumped against the rock, breathing hard. Her wound burned. Her vision blurred again. "System failure," whispered the rifle's dying core. "Join the club," she said, half smiling. She let the weapon rest beside her and closed her eyes for a moment. The mountains were quiet again, too quiet. A part of her wanted to believe she could stop here, fade away, become just another ghost story soldiers told to feel braver. But another part, the part that still bled for others, refused. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small, sealed data drive, the one she'd taken before the ambush, the one command never mentioned afterward. She turned it over in her hand. The label was nearly worn away, but she could still read it. "SIGINT Forward Command Relay, Kunar Province." Her pulse quickened. That was the source of their mission data, the same intel package that had led them into the valley. She stared at it for a long time. So this is what they were protecting. She slipped the drive back into her pocket. Her voice was low, almost a vow. "I'm not done yet." Far away, in a windowless control room lit by monitors and secrets, Colonel Collins sat alone, watching the static feed of a drone camera. The image flickered, mountains, ruins, silence. A single blip appeared on the thermal scan. Human moving south. She didn't call it in. Didn't log it. Didn't breathe. Instead, she leaned back, eyes glistening with something between relief and sorrow. "Stay alive, ghost," she whispered. "Stay invisible. Because in this war, the dead got medals. But the living carried truth. And truth was always heavier." The night swallowed Winters again as she descended deeper into the range, weaker, slower, but still moving. Her mind drifted to Hayes's face, the disbelief when he saw her in the valley, the gratitude when she'd saved his men. She hadn't done it for recognition. She'd done it because he reminded her of herself before the silence, before the classified lies and invisible wars. Somewhere out there, he'd be telling someone her story, or maybe pretending she never existed at all, the way command would prefer. Either way, she didn't regret saving them. Some things were still worth breaking for. The stars flickered faintly above, distant and cold. She watched them for a while before whispering, almost prayerfully, "Let them never see what we saw." Then she shouldered her weapon and started walking again. The hunt had changed. She wasn't a sniper anymore. She was evidence. And evidence doesn't die quietly. What if the war you were fighting wasn't the real one? The desert wind howled through the mountains like an old, wounded animal. In the half-light before dawn, Lieutenant Kara Winters moved carefully through the rocks, her breath visible in the cold air. Her body had begun to fail her. The wound in her side reopened during the night, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. She tore a strip of her sleeve, pressed it tight, and kept walking. Every step hurt, but stopping wasn't an option. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was carrying proof. The small data drive in her vest pocket felt heavier than her rifle. Inside it, encrypted intelligence logs she had pulled before the ambush. Logs that connected forward command stations to black market arms deals and unauthorized operations, the kind that didn't make it into briefings or history books. Someone had sold her team out. And someone very powerful wanted that truth to stay buried. She found a stream that wound between the rocks, knelt beside it, and drank slowly. The reflection in the water startled her, a face she barely recognized. Dirt, dried blood, eyes that looked older than her years. She touched the scar on her cheek, whispered to it, "You look like the kind of person no one would believe." Her comms had long since died, her batteries spent. The only link left was the drive, and the possibility, slim, desperate, that someone outside the system might listen. Thousands of miles away, the war didn't exist anymore, not on paper. At Bagram Airfield, the mission file labeled Operation Sidewinder had been officially closed. Losses: 3 wounded, 0 fatalities. Cause: classified insurgent ambush. End of story. But Lieutenant Hayes wasn't finished reading. He sat in the corner of the operations tent, flipping through the sanitized report, every page a lie written in official language. Team engaged under unexpected conditions. No prior knowledge of hostile buildup. Mission concluded successfully. Every word burned. "Lieutenant Hayes." He looked up. Chief Rodriguez stood in the doorway, holding a thermos of coffee, and that look, the one only soldiers gave each other when words weren't enough. "You're still here," Rodriguez said quietly. Hayes rubbed a hand across his face, still trying to figure out how an entire valley turned into a kill box without anyone knowing. Rodriguez poured him a cup. "You're not gonna find that in paperwork." Hayes nodded, voice low. "No, but maybe someone left breadcrumbs." He opened his laptop, sliding an encrypted drive into the port. The screen flickered to life: maps, satellite feeds, comm logs. The kind of access most officers weren't supposed to have. Rodriguez frowned. "Where'd you get that?" Hayes gave a half-smile. "Let's just say Collins isn't the only one with back channels." The data scrolled. Then he saw it: timestamps from their mission. Transmission logs showing an intel request from Forward Command Relay Kunar Province, the same source Winters had mentioned before the ambush. But there was another signature beneath it, a private contractor code, unregistered, hidden under a defense intelligence patch. Hayes's jaw clenched. Somebody inside fed them our location. Rodriguez's eyes hardened. That means the ambush wasn't bad luck. No, Hayes said quietly, it was bait. 2 nights later, Winters found the first sign of civilization, a flicker of light on the horizon. A town or maybe a camp. She approached carefully, rifle low, eyes scanning for movement. As she drew closer, she realized it wasn't military, it was civilian. Refugees, traders, locals trying to survive between borders. She wrapped her scarf tighter, hiding her face. At the edge of the settlement, she spotted a tent lit from within. A voice carried, American, low, calm. She froze. A man sat at a folding table surrounded by locals, his dusty laptop powered by a generator. His hair was long, his beard patchy, his clothes worn but clean, not military. Press credentials hung from his neck. She waited until the locals drifted away, then stepped out of the shadows. "Who are you broadcasting to?" she asked. He looked up sharply, startled by the sudden voice. "Depends who's asking." "Someone who needs to be heard." He studied her for a moment, the uniform, the weapon, the dirt and blood. "You military?" "Not anymore." He leaned back. "That's what they all say." Winters placed the data drive on the table. "You want a story? This one's real." He raised an eyebrow. "What's on it?" "Proof of something ugly." The journalist hesitated, then inserted the drive into his laptop. The screen filled with encrypted files, line after line of classified communications. His expression changed as he scrolled. "Jesus, who are you?" She met his gaze steadily. "Nobody, but if you want to do something that matters, you'll make sure this gets out." He frowned. "You're talking about leaking top-level military intel. You know what that means, right?" Winters's tone was flat. "It means the truth might finally cost the right people something." He studied her face, the steadiness, the exhaustion. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but if this is what I think it is, they'll come for both of us." Winters looked past him toward the distant hills. "They already are." Back at Bagram, Hayes's access had been revoked. Command didn't like questions, especially from survivors. He sat in a supply hangar staring at the lock screen on his laptop. The file was gone, the logs deleted. Someone had covered the trail. Then his radio crackled, a secure channel, one he hadn't used since before the mission. "Sidewinder, this is Ghost." He froze. For a heartbeat he thought it was memory playing tricks. Then her voice came again, faint but clear. "Repeat, this is Ghost, do you copy?" He grabbed the handset. "Ghost, Kara, where the hell are you?" Static, then, "South of Kunar, data recovered, I'm not safe." "Copy that," he said quickly, heart pounding. "Hold your position, I can get." "Negative." Her voice was steady but urgent. "They're tracking comms, don't come for me, Hayes, just listen." "Talk to me." "There's a file, SIGINT relay logs. Someone inside fed our coordinates to the enemy. You were never supposed to make it out." He felt cold all over. "Who?" "Look for Project Tag Aegis Delta. That's where the leak starts." Before he could respond, gunfire erupted through the transmission, sharp, chaotic. "Winters." Static swallowed the rest, then silence. Hayes stood motionless, radio clutched tight. Rodriguez, who'd been standing nearby, saw his expression. "What is it?" Hayes's voice cracked. "She's alive and in trouble." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. "Command'll shut you down if you try to go after her." Hayes's jaw set. "Then I won't ask." Meanwhile, in that border town, Winters and the journalist moved fast. The file had begun uploading through a satellite connection, slow, vulnerable. "How long?" she asked. 10 minutes, maybe less, he said, watching the progress bar crawl. You sure you want this public? Once it's out, there's no going back. Winters checked her weapon. I'm counting on that. Then she heard it, engines again, multiple vehicles. She looked out through the tent flap. Black SUVs, not Taliban, rolling in hard and fast. Time up. The journalist paled. They found us. They always find me. She grabbed the laptop, yanked the drive free, and tossed it to him. If I don't make it out, you do. Get it to anyone who'll listen. Name, Kara Winters. He blinked. You're trusting me with this. She gave a faint smile. No, I'm trusting what's left of humanity. Gunfire erupted outside. The first SUV screeched to a halt, doors flying open. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn. Winters fired first, precise, methodical, controlled chaos. 3 down before they hit cover. The journalist ducked behind a crate, clutching the laptop like it was life itself. She reloaded, moved to the other side of the tent, and fired again. But there were too many. She could see their formation, trained, disciplined, American. Not insurgents, contractors. Bullets tore through the canvas. She rolled, grabbed a grenade from her vest, pulled the pin, and threw it. The explosion tore through the entrance, buying them seconds. Go, she shouted. He hesitated. What about you? She met his eyes. Run. He did. As she covered his escape, a round caught her shoulder, spinning her backward. Pain flared white-hot, but she stayed up. She always stayed up. She dropped one more before the clip ran dry. Then silence again. The wind, the smoke, the blood. One of the attackers moved cautiously toward her, rifle raised. Target secured. She glared up at him, her voice a whisper through the pain. You think this stops with me? He hesitated, just long enough for her to pull the trigger of her sidearm. A final shot that found its mark. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the journalist's silhouette disappearing into the hills, laptop clutched to his chest. And for the first time since the ridge, she smiled. At Bagram, Hayes packed his gear in silence. The order on his desk read, immediate reassignment, stateside. He tore it in half. He didn't know how far he'd get, or how long before they called him rogue, too. But he owed her more than obedience. As he slung his rifle over his shoulder, Rodriguez grabbed his arm. You go dark on this, there's no coming back. Hayes nodded once, neither did she. He stepped into the fading light, the wind cutting across the tarmac, the sky bleeding orange over the mountains. Somewhere out there, she was still fighting, maybe alive, maybe gone, but she'd passed the torch. And for the first time in days, he knew exactly what he had to do. What happens when loyalty and truth become enemies? The mountains of Kunar province stretched like an endless scar beneath the dull gray sky. A lone convoy moved along the narrow dirt road, 3 civilian trucks, dusty and unmarked. Inside the last one sat Lieutenant Edward Hayes, a rifle across his lap, face half hidden beneath a local scarf. He hadn't slept in 2 days. The road blurred. The smell of diesel, dust, and sweat mixed with the staleness of guilt. He'd left Bagram under the radar, his departure masked as a medical transfer. Rodriguez had covered for him, risking everything. Now Hayes was off-grid, tracking whispers, fragmented intel, intercepted coordinates, and a single name whispered across encrypted channels. Project Aegis Delta. That was what Winters had said before the gunfire cut her off. And somewhere out there, buried in those mountains, was the truth, and maybe, just maybe, her. The truck jolted over a rock, throwing him forward. The driver, an Afghan local with a calmness born from too many wars, glanced at him. You sure about this place? The man asked in broken English. Hayes nodded. No, but I'm going anyway. The man grinned faintly. Then you fit here. Far below, in a darkened operations center, Colonel Eileen Collins stood in front of a wall of monitors. A digital map flickered with tracking markers. One blip, faint but steady, moved southeast. "Is that confirmed?" she asked. A tech analyst nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am, looks like Lieutenant Hayes. He left base 48 hours ago. He's off comms using forged movement codes." Collins exhaled through her nose. "And command?" "They've noticed. Orders are to intercept if possible." Collins's expression hardened. "If possible," she repeated quietly, then after a pause, "lose him." The analyst hesitated. "Ma'am." "Erase the trace," she said sharply. "He's not a target." The analyst swallowed hard. "Understood." Collins turned back to the screens. In the corner feed, a news broadcast flickered, foreign language headlines scrolling beneath grainy footage. Leaked intelligence files, blurred faces, speculation of corruption inside Allied command. The data Winters had passed to that journalist was out. The world was watching. And somewhere the ghosts were moving. 3 days into his trek, Hayes reached a remote checkpoint manned by Northern Alliance fighters loyal to no one but survival. He flashed forged papers, the kind Rodriguez had risked prison to make. A man in a tattered uniform stepped forward, rifle slung across his chest. "You're not aid, you're not press. Who are you?" Hayes met his eyes. "Someone looking for a woman." The man smirked. "Many men are." "This one's different," Hayes said. "She's American, wounded, might have come through here." The man's amusement faded. "Maybe I saw her, maybe not. What's she worth?" Hayes reached into his vest and tossed him a small pouch of cash, real, not issued. "Enough." The man opened it, counted, then gestured toward the mountains. There was fighting near the border, small group, contractors, one woman. They took her south, old Russian bunker system near Narwin Ridge. Locals call it the Hollow. The Hollow. The man nodded grimly. Because people who go there don't come out. The bunker was a relic, a leftover scar from another war. Steel doors buried into rock, half swallowed by dust and time. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed weakly over concrete corridors. The air was cold, metallic. Kara Winters sat in a chair, wrists zip-tied, eyes half-closed. Dried blood streaked her temple. The man across from her wore civilian clothes but spoke like military. Controlled, precise. "Lieutenant Winters," he said calmly, "you've caused quite a problem." She didn't respond. He smiled thinly. "The files you leaked, they're causing panic in places you can't imagine. Generals, politicians, men who built empires on the silence of soldiers like you. Still nothing. You could have been part of something greater," he continued, "but you made yourself a liability." Her voice was hoarse, low. "You mean I stopped pretending to be one of you?" He chuckled softly. "Idealism, always the disease of good soldiers." He leaned closer. "Tell me who helped you, the journalist, the SEAL team, the colonel. Give me names and maybe I'll let you live long enough to see how it ends." Winters lifted her head. Her eyes, though bloodshot, burned cold and clear. "You won't live long enough to ask again." He laughed. "You're in no position to threaten anyone." But before he could say more, alarms blared through the bunker. Shouts, running footsteps. He looked toward the door. What the hell? Then gunfire. Outside, under the cover of darkness, Hayes moved through the smoke, every muscle screaming. He'd infiltrated from the ridge, cutting through the outer guards in silence. Now the compound echoed with chaos. He moved fast, precise, methodical, just like she had in the valley. 2 guards down by the stairwell, 1 more near the door. He dropped them all with quiet precision. Then he saw her. Tied to a chair, pale but alive. "Kara." Her head lifted slowly, disbelief flickering across her bruised face. "You're insane." He cut the restraints. "You're welcome." She managed a weak smile. "You shouldn't have come." He met her eyes. "You said the same thing in the valley. I didn't listen then either." Footsteps thundered outside. She grabbed her rifle from the table, battered but functional. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad enough that I stopped counting." They moved together like two halves of the same instinct, covering angles, trading nods instead of words. The bond between soldiers forged not by time, but by survival. They reached the lower corridor, where an exit sign flickered weakly, but the sound of engines outside told them they weren't alone. Reinforcements. Hayes peeked around the corner, black SUVs, armed men pouring out. Too many. "We won't make it to the trucks," he said. "Then we don't," she replied, checking her magazine. He looked at her, saw the blood seeping through her bandage. "You're hurt." She gave a small, tired laugh. "So are you, you just hide it better." He smiled back, a flicker of dark humor in the chaos. "What's the plan?" She pointed to the far wall, an emergency fuel line snaking toward the storage tanks. "That." He raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" She nodded once. "Always." They moved fast, planting charges from her kit. The rhythmic click of detonators echoed through the concrete hall. Outside, the mercenaries advanced, flashlights cutting through the smoke. When the first one entered the corridor, Winters was waiting. 3 shots, 3 bodies. Then she turned to Hayes. "You ready?" He took one last look at her. "Always." They triggered the charges. The explosion tore through the bunker, a roar that swallowed the night. Fire and debris cascaded through the corridor. Hayes and Winters dove behind a steel door as the shockwave hit. When the smoke cleared, the entrance was gone, collapsed under tons of rock. The men outside screamed orders, their voices lost under the sound of burning fuel. Winters coughed, dragging herself to her feet. "That'll buy us a minute." Hayes pulled her arm over his shoulder. "Then let's use it." They stumbled through a maintenance shaft that led deeper into the mountain, following a faint draft of cool air. Escape. As they reached daylight, the sky was turning pale. The world outside was quiet again, as if the mountain itself wanted to forget. They collapsed behind a ridge, both bleeding, both alive. Hayes pulled a small beacon from his pack. "I can call an evac chopper. They'll send someone." She shook her head weakly. "Command can't know we're alive." "Then what?" She looked toward the rising sun. "Then we disappear." Hours later, as the wreckage of the bunker still smoldered, Colonel Collins watched from a secure drone feed. The screen showed nothing but fire. Her aide approached quietly. "Ma'am, satellite confirms full detonation. No survivors." Collins stared for a long moment. Then she whispered almost to herself, "You never did listen, did you, Ghost?" She turned away, face unreadable. But as she walked out of the room, a faint smile touched her lips, one that didn't belong to grief, but to belief. High in the mountains, beneath a fractured sky, Hayes wrapped a fresh bandage around Winter's shoulder. "You're going to make it," he said quietly. She smirked faintly. "You sound convinced." "I am." For a while they sat in silence, watching the clouds drift. Then Hayes asked, "That journalist, do you think he got out?" Winters nodded slowly. "He did. I made sure of it. The files are out there now. People will know." He looked at her, something like admiration or maybe sorrow in his eyes. "And if the truth gets buried again?" She met his gaze. "Then we dig." They sat there as the wind swept through the valley, carrying with it the faint echo of rotor blades, far away, maybe friendly, maybe not. Winters adjusted the rifle in her lap, the same one that had saved a team and started a war. "Funny," she said softly. "They called me Ghost to make me invisible. Now they'll never stop looking." Hayes looked out over the mountains. "Let them look. At least now they'll know who to fear." And as the sun rose over the battlefield that wasn't supposed to exist, 2 soldiers, branded traitors by command but bound by truth, disappeared into the light. How do you fight for the truth when it costs you everything you were sworn to protect? The world had changed while they hid. In the quiet valley where the mountains met the mist, Lieutenant Kara Winters and Lieutenant Edward Hayes had carved out a fragile kind of survival, a makeshift camp, a single fire at night shielded from the open sky, rations stretched thin, water from melted snow. It had been 12 days since they escaped the hollow, the bunker they'd destroyed along with its secrets. But truth had a way of leaking through cracks. Across the world, the files Winters had stolen now circled the internet like wildfire. Anonymous sources, shadow networks, independent reporters, all piecing together fragments of classified corruption. A journalist had survived, and he had done his job. But the world that watched didn't know who started the fire. And for command, that silence wasn't enough. They wanted certainty. They wanted erasure. Night again. The wind hissed through the ravine like a warning. Winters sat near the small fire, staring into the flames. The bandages on her shoulder were dark with dried blood, but she didn't seem to notice. Hayes watched her from across the fire, studying the way she moved, slow, deliberate, as if each breath was a choice. "You're healing," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, I'm adapting." He cracked a faint smile. "Always the operator." Her gaze flicked up. "You regret coming after me." He hesitated. "I regret not coming sooner." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels like confession. Finally she said, "You know what the hardest part is?" "What?" "Not dying." Her eyes glimmered with firelight. "I've died 3 times already. Once when they sent me on a mission I wasn't supposed to survive. Once when I realized who gave the order. And once when I decided to stop following them." Hayes looked into the flames, jaw tight. "You think they'll ever stop hunting us?" She shook her head. "They can't, we're proof." "Of what?" "That truth still bleeds." At dawn, they packed. The mountains offered protection, but not forever. They needed to move to cross into the border region, find safe passage out. Hayes adjusted his rifle, scanning the horizon. "We head east," he said. "Locals say there's an old NATO relay station near the pass. We can contact Collins. She might help." Winters frowned. "You trust her?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But she's the only one who ever looked at you like more than an asset." She didn't answer. She just started walking. Back at Bagram, the storm had finally broken. The leaks had reached Washington. Investigations were underway. Careers were ending. But the machine kept moving, fed by its own momentum. Inside a secure briefing room, Colonel Eileen Collins stood at attention before a line of officers, all higher in rank, none higher in principle. "Colonel," said the general at the head of the table, "your project has compromised national security, exposed operational data, and destabilized entire command structures. You have any idea the damage your people caused?" Collins didn't flinch. "My people saved lives." "Your people went rogue." "Maybe," she said quietly. "But sometimes that's what integrity looks like when it stops wearing a uniform." The general leaned forward. "We're reclassifying Aegis Delta as terminated, effective immediately. All surviving operatives are to be neutralized. Ghost and Hayes are priority targets." Her pulse quickened. "They're not threats. They are symbols, and symbols are dangerous." Collins exhaled slowly, masking the tremor in her hands. "What do you plan to tell the press?" He smiled thinly. "Nothing. We'll just make sure there's nothing left to tell." 2 days later. The valley was cold, the air thinner as Hayes and Winters ascended toward the pass. Their boots crunched on gravel. Every sound felt amplified in the stillness. Winters stopped suddenly, her instincts flaring. "We're being watched." Hayes froze. "How many?" "2 teams, maybe drones." They moved into cover, an outcrop of stone that shielded them from above. Hayes checked his binoculars. Through the haze, he saw movement, black figures on the ridge, too clean, too coordinated. Not locals, he said. Winters's expression hardened. Then it's them. The first round struck the rock beside her head. They returned fire instinctively, the sound echoing through the valley. Bullets sparked off stone. The rhythm of battle returned, too familiar, too natural. Move, Hayes shouted, covering her as they sprinted downslope. She ducked behind a boulder, reloading. How did they find us? He glanced up at the sky, a faint glimmer of metal against the clouds. Drone trace, we're cooked. Another explosion tore through the rocks behind them, sending debris in all directions. Hayes shielded her with his body as the blast wave hit. When the dust cleared, he saw her grimace, holding her side. Blood again. Go, she hissed. Finish it. He grabbed her arm. Not leaving you. Her voice was calm, even through the pain. You already did once. He stared at her, and in that instant he saw the weight she carried. Not just pain, but history. Guilt older than this mission. Then a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Lieutenant Winters, Lieutenant Hayes, you are surrounded. Surrender now. Winters's jaw tightened. Recognize that voice. He nodded. Contractors, Aegis cleanup. She smiled bitterly. Of course. He looked at her. We can't hold this position. I'm not planning to. She reached into her pack, pulled out a small transmitter, an old military beacon, one that broadcast on multiple bands. If we can get this close enough to the ridge, Collins might hear it. Collins, after what Command told her. She's not Command anymore, Winters said. She's human. They broke cover, sprinting between the rocks as gunfire followed them. Hayes went first, drawing fire. Winters moved behind him, firing short bursts, every shot precise despite the blood loss. When they reached the ridge, Hayes planted the beacon and activated the distress frequency. The device crackled to life, a faint pulsing tone. Static, then a voice. Ghost. Winters's heart jumped. Collins. Jesus Christ, you're alive. Not for long if you don't get us out, she said. East Ridge, Narwin Pass, extraction needed. Collins's voice came steady through the static. Hold position. I'll find you. No authorization, no backup, just me. Winters managed a small smile. Wouldn't have it any other way. An hour later, the storm broke again. Snow began to fall, soft and relentless, blanketing the valley in white. The contractors regrouped below, scanning with infrared scopes. The snow distorted their vision, buying the fugitives a precious few minutes. Winters slumped against a rock, pale and shaking. Hayes knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he tried to patch the wound. Stay with me, he said. You've survived worse. She smiled faintly. Yeah, but never twice in the same month. Don't joke. I'm not, I'm remembering. He met her eyes. What? The first time I met you, briefing room, you didn't even look at me. He blinked. You were intelligence I didn't know. You didn't need to, she interrupted softly. But you respected me after. That's what mattered. He swallowed hard. You saved my men, you saved me. She shook her head weakly. No, you saved me. You reminded me why I ever joined in the first place. Before he could answer, the hum of rotors cut through the snowfall. Collins's helicopter emerged from the fog, a black shadow against white sky. Move, Hayes shouted. They stumbled toward the clearing as the helicopter descended. The downdraft threw snow into blinding flurries. Collins leaned out the door, shouting, "Get in." Gunfire erupted from below. The contractors had sighted them again. Bullets ripped through the snow. Hayes pushed Winters forward, shielding her as they climbed aboard. The pilot gunned the throttle, the chopper lurching upward. A round shattered the side window. Another tore through the door. Winters slumped, breath catching. Hayes caught her, pressing his hand against her side. Warm blood spread across his fingers. Stay with me, Ghost. Her eyes fluttered open, faint smile returning. You hate that name. Not anymore. She exhaled, pain lacing her voice. They'll never stop coming. Hayes nodded. Then we don't stop running. Collins turned from the cockpit, her eyes wide with disbelief and relief all at once. Hold on, both of you. We're not done yet. The helicopter banked hard, disappearing into the fog, bullets chasing its shadow until the mountains swallowed them whole. Back at Bagram, an encrypted feed went dark. The general who had ordered their erasure stared at the blank monitor, face pale. He turned to his aide. Did we lose them? The aide nodded. No signal, sir. The general's jaw tightened. Then erase everything, every file, every trace. But in the corner of the screen, for just a second before it vanished, a transmission flickered, faint but clear. A single phrase embedded in code. Truth survives. In the helicopter, Collins glanced over her shoulder. Hayes was holding Winters's hand. Her eyes were closed, breathing shallow but steady. Collins's voice was quiet. You did it, Kara. You actually did it. Winters didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside, dawn was breaking. The first light of morning spilled across the horizon, touching the peaks with gold. For a moment, just one, the world looked clean again. But even light can't erase what shadows know. And for the soldiers who had chosen truth over obedience, peace would never come easy. Not yet. What do soldiers become when the battle ends, but the war inside them does? The helicopter skimmed low across the mountain range, battered by the wind. Inside, silence hung heavier than the gunfire they'd left behind. Lieutenant Edward Hayes sat on the cabin floor, one arm around Lieutenant Kara Ghost Winters, whose head rested against his chest. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a fragile promise she might not keep. Across from them, Colonel Eileen Collins gripped the edge of her seat, headset crackling as she spoke to the pilot. We'll make the border in 10. Hold her steady. Winters stirred, her lips moving faintly. 10 minutes is a long time in my world. Hayes looked down at her, voice raw. You're going to make it, you hear me. Her eyes opened, gray, unfocused but steady. You always say that like you can will it true. He managed a weak smile. Maybe I can. She exhaled slowly, a small sound between pain and laughter. You still think saving me was worth all this? Every second. Then I hope your ghosts are kinder than mine. Her eyes drifted closed again, the steady rhythm of the rotor blades filling the silence that followed. An hour later. A safe house in northern Pakistan, abandoned long ago by whoever built it. Concrete walls, metal roof, the kind of place that smelled like dust and secrets. Collins had cleared the area herself before bringing them in. Hayes laid Winters on a cot, adjusting her bandages while Collins unpacked a medkit. She needs a hospital, Hayes said. She can't go to one, Collins replied quietly. Every system still reports her KIA. The moment she registers alive, they'll triangulate. Hayes's jaw tightened. Then what? Collins met his eyes. We patch her up here, then we disappear. He stared at her. Disappear. That's the only way this ends, she said. Off-grid, permanently. We vanish, and the truth we bled for stays alive because they'll never find us. Hayes hesitated. You've thought this through. Collins gave a tired smile. I've been thinking about it since the day they sent her to die. That night the wind howled outside like a living thing. Hayes sat beside the cot, keeping silent watch. Winters was asleep, her breathing slow, her body trembling with fever. Collins stood near the doorway, staring at the flickering oil lamp. Do you know what they'll call us now? Hayes didn't look up. Traitors. She nodded, and they'll mean it. He exhaled. Maybe they should. We broke everything they taught us to protect. Collins turned to him. No, we protected what they forgot, humanity. For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of things no report could hold. Finally, Collins said, You should know something. The files she leaked. They triggered more than scandal. They uncovered entire false operations, missions that never happened, soldiers who never came home. Their families are getting closure because of her. Hayes's throat tightened. She'd never tell you that. She doesn't have to, Collins said softly. I knew her before she became Ghost. She joined because she wanted to serve. She stayed because she couldn't forgive herself for surviving when others didn't. Hayes looked at Winters, pale, scarred, but still unbroken. She saved my men. She saved me. She's not a ghost, Colonel. She's the part of us that refuses to die. Days passed. The wound healed slowly. Winters regained strength enough to walk, though each step still cost her something. She spent most of her time outside the safe house, sitting in the cold morning sun, rifle resting across her knees, not as a weapon now, but as memory. One morning Hayes found her there, watching the horizon. "Still keeping watch?" he asked. She didn't turn. Habit. "Collins says we can move soon. She's found a contact who can get us out under new IDs. South route, through the valley." Winters nodded, and then we live. She smiled faintly, eyes still on the mountains. "You say that like it's simple." "It's the only plan we've got." For a long time, neither spoke. The world around them felt too still, like even nature was holding its breath. Finally, Winters said, "I used to think survival was enough, that staying alive was victory. And now—" She turned to him, her expression quiet but fierce. "Now I think survival without purpose is just a slower kind of dying." He met her gaze. "Then what's your purpose now?" "To make sure what we did means something." That afternoon, Collins returned from a supply run, her face pale. "We have a problem," she said. Hayes stood. "What kind?" "Command moving faster than expected. They've scrubbed every trace of Aegis Delta, every name, every file. If we don't leave tonight, we vanish for real, the wrong kind of vanish." Winters rose slowly, steadying herself against the wall. "Then we go now." Hayes shook his head. "You're not ready." She looked at him, eyes sharp again. "I was born ready, I just forgot for a while." Collins smiled faintly. "That's the Ghost I remember." Night again. Snow falling in slow, soft spirals. They loaded what they could into a battered Land Cruiser, fuel, supplies, one rifle each. The mountains loomed ahead, silent witnesses to everything humanity tried to hide. As they started the engine, Collins glanced at Winters. "You sure about this? We disappear, there's no coming back." Winters looked out the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I've already died once for them. This time, I'll live for myself." The headlights cut through the darkness as they descended the mountain road. Hours later, dawn broke over the horizon, gold over gray. They reached a river crossing, the kind that marked the invisible line between hunted and free. Collins stopped the car, engine idling. "This is it. Once we cross, we're ghosts for real." Hayes looked at her. "You think they'll ever stop looking?" She shook her head. "They'll stop when they need someone new to blame." Winters smiled faintly. "They'll find someone, they always do." The vehicle rolled across the shallow water. For a moment, the rising sun turned the river into fire. Hayes glanced at Winters, her face calm, eyes fixed ahead. "If you could go back," he asked softly, "before all this, would you do it again?" She thought about it, the valley, the blood, the silence, the cost. "Yes," she said finally, "because sometimes the right thing is the thing you can't live with, but you do it anyway." He nodded slowly, the words settling deep. "And if you could say one thing to the ones who will never know what you did?" She looked toward the light breaking through the clouds. "I'd tell them the truth isn't a weapon, it's a mirror. You just have to be brave enough to look." Weeks later, somewhere far from any map in a small coastal village hidden by fog, a woman tended a small garden behind a weathered house. Her hair was shorter now, her limp still there, but her eyes, those gray, unyielding eyes, hadn't changed. A man sat nearby, fixing a battered radio haze, older by months that felt like years. Collins visited sometimes, bringing news from nowhere in particular. The world had moved on. The headlines had faded, but the truth they unleashed had left cracks in the foundation that power couldn't seal. One afternoon, Collins handed Winters a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a single photo. The journalist, standing in front of an international tribunal. Behind him, a projected image of the leaked documents. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written in pen, "For the ones who didn't stay silent." Winters stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Hayes watched her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Better than I deserve." He smiled faintly. "We all are." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Winters stood on the shore, the waves washing cold around her boots. The ocean stretched endless, the sky painted in fatting gold. She closed her eyes and listened, not for gunfire, not for engines, but for the quiet. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like silence. It felt like peace trying to remember her name. Hayes joined her, standing beside her without a word. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. "Every day." "And do you regret it?" He looked out at the horizon. "No, because for once we didn't fight for a flag, we fought for what's right." She nodded slowly. "Maybe that's enough." They stood there until the sun vanished, two soldiers who had survived everything except the memory of it. Behind them, the small house stood quiet against the wind, the faint hum of a radio breaking through the dusk. A new broadcast, voices speaking the truth they had nearly died for. Winters smiled. "They're still listening." Hayes glanced at her. "So what now?" She took a breath, the kind that felt like closure. "Now we live." The screen fades to black. A heartbeat. Then the narrator's voice, soft, steady, human. "In the end, she never asked for glory or medals or recognition. She asked for truth, and in a world built on silence, that was the loudest act of all. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.